King Maegor, King Aenys, and the events explaining the birth of the Hightower Citadel Fate of the Seven Alliance in Fire and Blood. This series will be split into 7 parts. Part 1 and Part 2 we have already covered. It was the origin of the Grand Maester Conspiracy theory, as well as the first hidden proof of Grand Maester Conspiracy in House of the Dragon. Today will be Part 3, the events explaining the birth of the Grand Maester Conspiracy in Fire and Blood. Part 4, Part 5, and Part 6, the second, third and fourth hidden proofs of Grand Maester Conspiracy in House of the Dragon, as well as Part 7, the secret involvement of House Stark, will be covered in future videos. Now I'd like you to keep in mind that the reason for which I split this series into 7 parts was so that it wouldn't be one very exhaustingly long video that would be intimidating for some people to click on. However, it is only once you have all 7 parts together that the theory makes the most sense. So I do recommend following the parts as they're numbered. Part 3. The reason for the birth of the Grand Maester Conspiracy and the Hightower Citadel Fate of the Seven Alliance. First, we need to understand the function of the Maesters and the Citadel of Old Town. The Citadel is a complex of buildings in Old Town that serves as the central home to the Order of the Maesters. And the Maesters are an order of scholars, healers, messengers, and scientists. But what is the involvement of House Hightower with the Maesters and the Citadel? Well, House Hightower was integral in the Citadel's foundation and continues to preserve the order. Leighton Hightower, the Lord of Old Town at the time of A Song of Ice and Fire, includes Protector of the Citadel among his titles. The office of the Grand Maester was created by Aegon Targaryen, the first of his name, Aegon the Conqueror. He requested for an Archmaester of the Citadel to advise him on governing the Seven Kingdoms. Sworn to serve the whole realm, the Grand Maester sits on the King's small council and acts as one of the royal advisors, as the Citadel's representative at the royal court of the King on the Iron Throne. Who are the Archmaesters? The Archmaesters are maesters who have demonstrated mastery of a particular subject. Archmaesters have the right to sit on the conclave, a council which elects the Grand Maester and determines when the seasons change. The meetings of the conclave are conducted behind closed doors at the Citadel. When Aegon Targaryen, the first of his name, landed at the mouth of the Blackwater Rush, the High Septon in Old Town locked himself inside the Starry Sept and prayed for 7 whole days while refusing to eat or drink. The greatest city in all of Westeros, ruled by the Hightowers of the Hightower, the oldest, richest, and most powerful of the noble houses of the Reach, Old Town was also the center of the fate. At the end of the 7th day, the High Septon emerged from his fast and declared that the fate of the Seven would not fight Aegon's conquest, proclaiming that if they did, Old Town would burn and the Starry Sept would be destroyed. That was how Aegon the Conqueror captured Old Town. Now, what were House Hightower doing during Aegon's conquest? The conquest, which pretty much ended with the Battle of the Field of Fire that you see on the right, where some great houses got completely extinct. Lord Hightower determined that he would not oppose the conqueror by force of arms. Thus, it was that no men from Old Town burned on the Field of Fire. Indeed, Lord Hightower determined that he would not oppose the conqueror by force of arms, meaning that he could oppose the conqueror or House Targaryen overall with other means that are not violent. The fate of the Seven, recognizing and crowning Aegon Targaryen as the first king of all of Westeros. Within the Starry Sept, the High Septon declared Aegon to be king of the Andals, the Rhoynar, the First Man, Lord of the Seven Kingdoms, and Protector of the Realm. And this is how King Aegon Targaryen, first of his name, and first king on the Iron Throne, became the ruler of all of Westeros. Aegon treated the defeated lords with respect and allowed each region to retain its own laws and customs. Aegon often traveled the realm with 6 maesters who educated him on each region's local customs and history. So Aegon needed the maesters for their knowledge and wisdom. But the wisest and most learned men in the Seven Kingdoms were the Maesters of the Citadel, each of them the supreme authority in one of the great discipline. In 5 AC, AC meaning after the conquest, King Aegon, feeling that the realm might benefit from such wisdom, requested the conclave to send him one of their own number to advise and consult with him on all matters related to the governance of the realm. Thus was the office of Grand Maester created at King Aegon's request. Aegon wanted and needed an Archmaester. During his rule, Aegon tread carefully with the fate of the Seven so they would not oppose him. Aegon built a grand sept on Visenya's hill and agreed to the construction of an even grander one known as the Sept of Remembrance. The first question of succession then arose. Indeed, King Aegon the Conqueror was married to his two sisters, Queen Visenya and Queen Aenys. The two queens each had a son. Visenya had Maegor and Aenys had Aenys. Aenys was older than Maegor. He was the one who became king on the Iron Throne following the death of King Aegon the Conqueror after he had a stroke. Prince Aenys was the unquestioned heir to the Iron Throne, all agreed. But now an issue arose as to whether Prince Maegor remained second in the line of succession or should be considered to have fallen to third behind the newborn prince. Indeed, King Aenys Targaryen had been married to Queen Alyssa Velaryon to unite the two great houses. His High Holiness proposed a different bride for Maegor, his own niece, Ceryse Hightower. Introducing Ceryse Hightower, maiden daughter to the Lord of Oldtown, Manfred Hightower. King Aegon, mindful of the advantages of closer ties with Oldtown and his ruling house, saw wisdom in the choice and agreed to the match. Maegor was thus betrothed to Lady Ceryse Hightower, whom he married in a ceremony presided over by the High Septon himself. And as we see on this picture of the family tree, Aenys and Alyssa Velaryon had a daughter, Rhaena Targaryen, the birth of the Hightower Citadel Fate of the Seven Alliance. 2 years after Aegon the Conqueror's death from a stroke, King Aenys and Queen Alyssa had a sixth child. Yet, Maegor's 14-year marriage to Lady Ceryse Hightower still remained barren. Consequently, Maegor took a drastic step, marrying a second wife in secret on Dragonstone using a Valyrian rite officiated by the Dowager Queen Visenya. When King Aenys was informed of the marriage, the quarrel that followed was bitter, and the feeling was echoed by Lady Ceryse's father, Lord Manfred Hightower, and the High Septon himself, who denounced Maegor for the sin of bigamy. Maegor was defiant. Given the choice to renounce Alice Harroway or go into exile across the Narrow Sea, he chose the latter, taking Alice, Balerion, and the sword Blackfyre with him, and leaving Ceryse Hightower abandoned at King's Landing. Maegor angered the fate of the Seven. In 41 AC, convinced that Maegor's exile had repaired the anger against House Targaryen, Aenys decided to betroth his daughter Princess Rhaena to her brother Prince Aegon. The High Septon denounced the marriage plans, continued to escalate the conflict, calling Aenys King Abomination in fiery sermons, and the Fate militant took up arms. The army of the Fate of the Seven, the warriors' sons, and the poor fellows. The Fate militant was made up of two military orders, the nobles and the puissant order of the warriors' sons and the poor fellows. The warriors' sons were the most illustrious, acting as the High Septon's personal guard and army. The warriors' sons. All members were knights, and most were men of high birth, younger sons of great houses of ancient lineage. Their sigil was the warrior's rainbow sword on black. As we can see in the beautiful art by Joshua Kairos, which you can find all of his art on his website. The failed assassination attempt on King Aenys' life by the Fate of the Seven. Sir Raymond Baratheon of the King's Guard saved King Aenys' life when two poor fellows scaled the walls of the King's Manse upon Visenya's hill and slipped into the royal apartments in an attempt to murder the king. At Dragonstone, Dowager Queen Visenya counseled him to bring fire and blood to the Starry Sept and the Sept of Remembrance, which, remember, we said earlier King Aegon the Conqueror had built for the Fates as a gift so that they would not oppose the House of the Dragon. Aenys refused to do so, but at the same time was incapable of deciding how to act instead. And unfortunately, thus came the successful assassination of King Aenys Targaryen. Eventually, the king fell ill. By late 41 AC, most of the realm had turned against him. His health improved briefly when Dowager Queen Visenya took over his care, but the king died 3 days later. Years afterward, however, it would be whispered that Visenya had poisoned the king. The Dowager Queen Visenya departed Dragonstone on Maegor in the hour following Aenys' death, but she was not gone for long. When she returned to Dragonstone, it was with Prince Maegor and Balerion at her side. Maegor stopped on Dragonstone only long enough to claim his father Aegon's crown. His mother placed it on his head, much as she had for his own father years ago, declaring him king, the coronation of King Maegor Targaryen. However, Grand Maester Gawain protested Maegor's coronation, stating that by all the laws of inheritance, the crown should pass to Aegon, the son of Aenys. Maegor beheaded Gawain with Blackfire, ending contention against Maegor's ascension, and thus came about the first Grand Maester beheading, the death of Grand Maester Gawain, the first major event explaining the birth of the Grand Maester Conspiracy. Indeed, thus followed the reign of Maegor Targaryen from 42 AC after the conquest to 48 AC. So, remember the failed assassination attempt on King Aenys' life by the Fate of the Seven at Dragonstone? Dowager Queen counseled him to bring fire and blood to the Starry Sept and the Sept of Remembrance. Aenys refused to do so. Well, the reign of King Maegor the Cruel started with a fire. Maegor brought fire and blood to the Sept of Remembrance. Maegor flew Balerion to the Hill of Aenis, setting the Sept of Remembrance alight as the warriors' sons were at their morning prayers. Those that fled the Inferno were slain by Maegor's waiting soldiers. 700 men died that day, and the Order of the Warrior Sons would never again rise to its former glory. Thus came about Maegor's third wedding. On his return to King's Landing, Maegor declared his intent to marry Tiana of the Tower. The only one to raise an objection was Grand Maester Myros. "Your one true wife awaits you in the High Tower," Myros said about Ceryse Hightower. The king heard him out in silence, then descended from the throne, drew Blackfire, and slew him where he stood. Thus came about the second Grand Maester beheading, the death of Grand Maester Myros. The second major event explaining the birth of the Grand Maester Conspiracy. The High Septon condemned Maegor's third wedding. In 43 AC, King Maegor and Dowager Queen Visenya Targaryen moved towards Old Town, threatening to incinerate the Starry Sept in response to the High Septon's continued condemnation of his polygamous marriages. The High Septon instead died suddenly, shortly before they arrived. Ceryse Hightower then agreed to accept Maegor's other two wives. When Queen Alice Haraway announced that she was pregnant, she went into labor only 3 months later and gave birth to a monstrosity eyeless and twisted. "This cannot be my son!" Maegor roared in anguish. Then his grief turned to fury, and he ordered the immediate execution of the midwife and septas who had charge of the queen's care, and Grand Maester Desmond as well, sparing only Alice's sisters. It is said that Maegor was seated on the Iron Throne with the head of the Grand Maester in his hands when Queen Tiana came to tell him he had been deceived. The child was not his seed. On the nights when the king was sharing a bed with Queen Ceryse or Queen Tiana, Lucas Haraway, her father, sent men to his daughter's bed to get her with child. Maegor refused to believe that. He told Tiana she was a jealous witch and barren, throwing the Grand Maester's head at her. "Spiders do not lie," the mistress of the Whisperers replied. She handed the king a list. Written there were the names of 20 men alleged to have given their seed to Queen Alice. Thus is the third major event explaining the birth of the Grand Maester Conspiracy. 3 Grand Maesters were beheaded during the reign of King Maegor the Cruel. Still without an heir, Maegor decided to marry yet again, but this time he took 3 more wives. The Black Brides, they called them, were the 3 wives of King Maegor Targaryen, who wed them in a single ceremony held in 47 AC, officiated by the new High Septon. Maegor chose them because the 3 women were of proven fertility. All had been widows of men who had died in Maegor's wars or at his command. Among the 3 was his own niece, Princess Rhaena, the daughter of his brother Aenys, who had remained on Fair Isle since her brother Aegon's death. 6 wives and not 1 child. Safe to assume it was not Ceryse Hightower who had been barren, but actually King Maegor Targaryen himself who was sterile. In 45 AC, Ceryse Hightower died of a sudden illness. It was rumored she had said something to offend Maegor, and he ordered Sir Owen Bush of the King's Guard to remove her tongue. While Sir Maladon Moore held her, Ceryse allegedly struggled so much that Owen's knife slipped and he accidentally slashed her throat. Though never proven, this story was widely believed at the time. The butchering of Ceryse Hightower and the loss of their queen was the major event explaining the reason for House Hightower to join the Maesters of the Citadel in an alliance against House Targaryen, and thus came about the birth of the Grand Maester Conspiracy and the Hightower Citadel fate of the Seven Alliance. However, this was only the birth of the Grand Maester Conspiracy, but not the beginning of the conspiracy itself. The reign of Jaehaerys Targaryen from 48 AC to 103 AC was the most peaceful time that Westeros had ever seen since King Aegon the Conqueror had created the role of King of all of Westeros. King Jaehaerys Targaryen was called the Conciliator. There was no need for the Grand Maester Conspiracy to act under the reign of King Jaehaerys, since it was a peaceful time and he was a very good ruler that was able to conciliate all of the parties together in an unprecedented period of peace. But remember, Fire and Blood, the book on which House of the Dragon is based off, and the history of the Targaryens, was written from the point of view of Archmaester Gildain, an Archmaester of the Citadel of Oldtown, and he himself, in Fire and Blood, said the following: "The old king and good Queen Alysanne ruled together until her death in 100 AC, and she produced 13 children. 4 of them, 2 sons and 2 daughters, grew to maturity, married, and produced children of their own. Never before or since had the 7 kingdoms been blessed or cursed, in the view of some, with so many Targaryen princelings. From the loins of the old king and his beloved queen sprang such a confusion of claims and claimants that many maesters believed that the dance of the dragons or some similar struggle was inevitable. This was not apparent in the early years of Jaehaerys. So as this quote states, it was not apparent before in the early years of Jaehaerys that there would ever be a chance of another Maegor the Cruel. Otto Hightower himself, in the first episode of House of the Dragon, said Daemon would be a second Maegor or worse, that they had to do something to prevent that from happening. The birth of the Grand Maester Conspiracy rose from the fear of a second Maegor, which rose from the fact that Jaehaerys and good Queen Alysanne had so many children, and that the Maesters of the Citadel, as well as the Fate of the Seven, were scared that another Maegor would arise, and all of the atrocities that we just mentioned, and he did a lot more than that we didn't mention, would happen again. But this is a very good reason for the conspiracy to exist, and for the conspiracy to start acting around the time of the death of good Queen Alysanne. Now I'd like you to consider the following. You are an Archmaester of the Citadel, and the current Targaryen king needs a new Grand Maester. And whether you want to or not, the Conclave can vote to make you the new Grand Maester to the king. Wouldn't you be scared that this king, or the one after him, his heir, decides to one day behead you? because they did not like your counsel or opinion, which the role of Grand Maester was created for that exact purpose by Aegon the Conqueror? They call it the Targaryen madness. They say that every time a new Targaryen is born, the gods toss the coin in the air, and the world holds its breath to see how it will land. Now consider the following. You are from House Hightower. Would you forget what happened to the only Hightower queen that ever was? Wouldn't you want to prevent it from happening again to your daughter if you were Otto Hightower? Wouldn't you want to prevent it from happening to Alicent Hightower? Can you really blame the Greens and the Maesters of the Citadel for the Grand Maester Conspiracy? Part 4. The second hidden proof of Grand Maester Conspiracy in House of the Dragon. Please don't forget to like and comment on this video. I worked on this series for the last 2 months or so since House of the Dragon ended, and you could thank me by simply subscribing to this channel. I am Aegon the Informer, and you have been informed.